probably top 3 movies I've seen ever.
Listen, all right. Welcome back to another episode of Bros Book Club. We are here. May thy podcast be full of chatter, as Mikey on the mic says. We are back to discuss Dune. Arrakis. Dune Part 2. I have here my former panel from the first episode, Ryan, the Dune Too Much, and Mikey on the mic, our resident Dune expert, our local Fremen, to discuss all things Arrakis. Guys, let's just jump in. We've all seen the movie. We're all really excited to talk about it. Mikey, I'm going to give you the floor first. I just want you to talk about what did you think of the movie? How did it compare to the first one for you? Just anything you want to talk about the movie, go ahead. You have the floor.
I guess I want to start by saying that Denis Villeneuve is the GOAT when it comes to sci-fi in the modern era. I think he has completely revolutionized what modern cinema is and how we look at sci-fi movies. Just incredible. This movie was the culmination of everything that I wanted to see from part one. There was so much stage setting and so much stuff that he set up that I just, regardless of how he was going to land it close to the books or if he was going to move away from it, I just wanted to see where he went with it. And he blew it out of the water. Every expectation I had, he blew it out of the water. Incredible. Probably top 3 movies I've seen ever.
Listen,
so good. Just an incredible movie.
That's
Ryan, you go next.
That's a big claim ever. I mean, honestly, I'm right there with you, Mikey. This was probably one of the more impossible tasks that a movie director could have doing the first one well, because we saw how hard it was, whether you like all the old 80s and 2000s attempts to put this story on film, whether you like that or not. I think in general, everyone's yeah, it's okay. It didn't blow anyone away. But with the first one, he killed it. And then, as we all know, it's really hard to do a second one to one up that. And he totally did. He is perfect. He is the Lisan Al-Gaib to get this movie made, man, to tell this story. He was the one. And in a similar vein, as you're saying, Mikey, the way he's kind of taking on sci-fi and the way he's telling it and the things that he wants to show just lines up perfectly for how this story should be told on film. And it is, I'm right there with you. It's one of my favorite sci-fi movies in my life. Top 3 for sure. I love that movie. I've seen it once. I'm going to go back and watch it.
Yes, I've watched it twice now. Mikey, have you watched it again or just the one time?
I've seen it twice now, yeah.
Yeah, I'm at 2 now, and it, even on the second watch, holds up. So for me, I agree with a lot of what you guys say. I mean, so much credit has to go to Denis. He really is the Lisan Al-Gaib for sci-fi movies. He is, give him all the IPs, right? Anything he wants, give him all the IPs, give him all the budget. He'll figure it out. The biggest thing, the first time that I watched it, especially towards the end, it started to sink in that man, I haven't felt this way about a movie since the Lord of the Rings, the Dark Knights. and to an extent Avengers Endgame, but I put Endgame kind of in its own category because I don't know what Marvel did to the culmination up to Endgame just feels like its own thing. But Dune Part 2 really felt like a callback to, like, for me, the Two Towers. Like, the Fellowship of the Ring was obviously amazing, fantastic movie, but the Two Towers just like took that trilogy to the next level, right? Like everything that the Fellowship of the Ring promised and like set up, the Two Towers then delivered on. And then it was like, whoa, we're watching something special here, right? And then obviously Return of the King turned out to be,
Yeah,
wrapping up the trilogy.
Masterpiece.
You can't help but while you're watching it, you're trying to pay attention and you're like caught up in the gravity of it.
Yes.
But you can't help while you're watching it to know you're watching something historical.
Yes.
Like, you're watching something amazing, and it's like it's like you're fully immersed in the movie, but there is like a moment where you're like taken out of it because you're just like overwhelmed by the scope of what you're seeing. It's like, you need to be paying attention because you're witnessing something once in a lifetime. At least that's how it was for me. I think the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies are probably the closest thing I can think of to that feeling that I've had before. The first time I watched Star Wars, obviously that's the obvious comparison that people are going to make is Dune to Star Wars. We can talk about that. I think that Dune is more thematically rich than Star Wars is. But again, it's like, it's on that level of like the very first time I ever watched Star Wars as a kid, it was like that feeling of like, I'm experiencing something that is completely and wholly unique and historical. And like, I don't know that I'm ever going to experience anything like that. I felt a similar thing when I watched, Infinity War and Endgame, but not quite to that level. It was like, you were really, I only felt that way because it was like this culmination of like something that I had really, really invested years and years and years of my life to, watching all the Marvel movies. This one, just watching it for the first time, you had part one. And so this was, the culmination of what part one set up, but it wasn't an investment of like, over a decade's worth of films that I watched that led me to that. Just like on its own, it was just incredible. And so I think, hats off to what they were able to accomplish, and just taking something that a lot of people would consider unadaptable and actually adapting it to a modern audience, to something that we would watch today and say, that's relevant to like how we feel and what we want out of a movie. Adapting that from something that was created in the 1960s is no small task, and hats off to them for doing that.
The interesting thing, you really get this pulse of like, it has hit some vein in society that I think there's different generations that have sort of this. They have their like sci-fi movies. There's different generations. Like there's the people with the first Star Wars. There's people with the sequels. There's the people with Lord of the Rings. And I think for us, like we kind of shared Lord of the Rings and all that stuff, but we were pretty young when that came out, like honestly. And I don't feel like we've had anything in between that time until now. Dune really feels like that sci-fi series for us, for our generation, to talk about for like our kids or our grandkids. As funny as it sounds, but it's like I've got an uncle and I've got like older friends that are like, bro, Lord of the Rings, watching it in theaters, it has that effect. It's like a generational effect. So he hit it out of the park. And I went and watched it on a Wednesday at 5 p.m. and it was packed. And so was the showing after that.
Yeah, I like that you brought up that, like, it did feel like it's been hitting some sort of vein for moviegoers, because I agree. I feel like we haven't had a true epic, quote unquote, like just an epic style movie like that in years. You know what I mean? The closest thing I can think of is Endgame. But even then, like we mentioned, like Endgame just kind of feels like its own thing, like just a truly an epic for epic's sake. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I remember during the sandworm charge, that's really what Mikey was describing. Like I had chills. I was immersed, but at the same time, I was kind of taken out of it and realizing like, whoa, like the epic movie I'm hoping is back. Like I hope studios realize from this that moviegoers are like hungry for this kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like we don't just want a million superhero origin story movies. Like we want to go back to that feeling of like these big worlds and these big epic battles, big heroes and trilogies and things like that. Like I mean, I miss those things. You know
Ernie,
what I mean?
that's such a good point. That is such a good point. I think, people are like studios and like people like when they make articles, they're like, oh, people are just tired of going to the movies. People don't want to go to the movies anymore. Like streaming killed movies. Like, yeah, during COVID, sure. But like, this just proves that we do want to see movies. We want to see good movies. We want to see movies that are faithful to their source material. Obviously, they're going to make changes where needed, but like it's faithful to the theme of the movie. It's not an epic just for epic's sake. Like it's a story with rich themes and adult themes that like it makes you think and it immerses you in a world.
And
like,
it wasn't safe. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like they took a big risk / swing with this, like because like we've been saying, Dune has been seen as a property that's like borderline unadaptable. There's some weird shit in the book which I want to talk about later in the episode, but like they like they went big on this property and just like that. I love that they gave Denis the reins and was just like, hey, you have a vision for this, just take it and go for it, and he just fucking knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, just we can move off this topic, but I think just in general, from there in the interim, it did shift from movies to series, and it basically Game of Thrones was our last sort of big world epic. I feel like that we've had, and now it's back to Dune. And look what the movies have done, like in the past year, Oppenheimer, all these huge hits. Like the movies are back, baby. We're so back.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up about Game of Thrones too, because I agree with you. Like I feel like there was kind of a shift in like if we're gonna go big, let's go big on a TV show because everybody wants like whatever the next Game of Thrones is gonna be. There's not gonna be another Game of Thrones, but they want like this next TV show that's gonna take over the social zeitgeist or whatever.
Yeah.
But the difference is everybody watches TV shows at home. Right. And no matter how badass your home theater is, nothing compares to the theater experience. You know what I mean? Like the sandworm charge and like the seats are fucking shaking my ass and stuff like that. Like those
cheeks are clapping.
Those cheeks are clapping while the Sardakar's cheeks are getting clapped. Like that's just, nothing lives up to that experience. You know what I mean?
I mean, even like when the comedic effect moments are happening where Stilgar's just like having a massive erection for everything Paul does, like and like the whole theater's like cracking up. It's great. Like
the whole
it's
theater's
just like
into it.
We're experiencing something together, and like you just can't get that at home. Like seeing that in IMAX was just incredible.
Oh my god, yeah! I watched it in Dolby. The like AMC's version of IMAX or whatever. Oh my god, dude. It was insane. Like and then like the scenes when they take the water of life, like when Jessica drinks the water of life and when Paul drinks the water of life, like dude, that theater was just rumbling and like you could just like feel that moment, like you can't really get that in a TV show. Like obviously, I'm not to dog TV shows or like Game of Thrones was amazing and things like that. But there's a level of immersion that you get in a theater that you like really can't recreate in a TV show.
Man, that's a good point. Cause like I got goosebumps in multiple situations, multiple scenes in Dune 2. And I know that was shared across the whole theater. Like people were eyes to the screen, so glued and into it. And yeah, I mean that's hard to do in a TV show. Everyone's watching at home and stuff.
The last time I had a movie experience like that was probably No Way Home. Just when all the Spider-Man came on there, I was like, Toby
Yeah.
and Andrew. Like
Yeah.
that's probably the closest thing that I can think of like recently where I've had where we were all just like completely enthralled and just like at the edge of our seats. But you know, just stellar movie experience to see that. Like even the second time, even when I knew what was coming, like just getting a chance to like sit down and like I think the first time I was just so swept up in what was happening that I couldn't even like fully focus on the little details because there's just so much little things that he packed in there. Like it's a labor of love how much he was faithful to the material.
I think this movie was like the perfect formula, the perfect mix of it was kind of cinematic in the pictures that you saw and plot driven and the action. Like it was the nice mixture.
Dude, I
across all
had
those
this
three.
thought when I was like the first time I was watching the movie, and especially during the first action scene when they're when he's basically doing his first raid on the what are those things called? The sand crawlers.
Yeah.
Like that scene really made me realize like this movie is not only like a labor of love for Denis, but it's also a culmination of like his entire career. Like for me, I saw flashes of Blade Runner 2049 in there. I saw big influences of Sicario, like that hard R-rated violent action in Sicario, like especially those scenes like when they're raiding the sandcrawlers, like really reminded me of Sicario. And just like you could see like his whole oeuvre like all culminating into like Dune, right? Like every movie he's made up to this point led him to Dune. And yeah, it was beautiful to see.
And those scenes where Chani and Paul are like they're shooting the rocket out. Oh man, those are really cool killer action scenes, man.
I mean, something else is just as far as like a labor of love and how much effort he put into this is that he gave things room to breathe too, like where it was needed. You know,
What do you mean?
the relationship between Paul and Chani, the way that he facilitated their, you know, love story. Like Dune isn't really a love story at the end of the day, but I mean, there's a part of that, right? And it wasn't just like, okay, because the book says they have to be together, they're the love interest now. Like it felt natural, and you were like rooting for them to like find each other. And like there's like that scene where they're sand walking out on the dunes together, and then like the scene of them in the tent together, where she's like comforting him after his vision. Like he just gives it room to breathe, and it feels natural. Watching how Paul was accepted by the Fremen and how he got his name, and like it's just incredible. I felt like I was experiencing obviously a sci-fi movie with like on a different planet, but it felt like real people. It's how people would act. It's how people would like respond. Like everybody didn't like in the big thing about the books that is like I'm really glad that he changed is that he gave everybody like their own opinion, right? There was a dichotomy between the way the Fremen saw Paul. The northern folks didn't see him as the Messiah at first, right? They were very skeptical of that. And they saw like the prophecies as a way of, people enslaving them and controlling them. Chani mentioned this is how they enslave us. And then it was the southern Fremen who were very superstitious and were believing in that right away. And then how he pulled them on his side. It's like, that's how real people are. Not everybody has the exact same idea of what Messiah looks like. Even in our world, like, there's the differences between Christianity and Judaism. Like they both, and Islam, like they all believe in Jesus, but they all have a different, of different levels of importance within the religion of where Jesus sits. Some of them believe him as a Messiah figure, others don't. And I just love that because I thought as much as I like the books, that's one thing that I would criticize is that like all the Fremen just immediately accept Paul as the Messiah, and there's like no real conflict until the second book.
So this is a really good segue because I want to talk about the book as well. Now that we have like both movies that cover the first book, I want to really like dig into like our thoughts on like how the movies were adapted from the book, and also just kind of like, you know, revisit what we talked about on our first episode, the first time we talked about Dune, right? So before Dune Part 2, I reread the first book. If you remember, I gave up with about 150 pages left the first time I tried reading it. I just like DNF'd it. I remember specifically it was when Fade Rotha showed up for the first time, and I was just like, who the fuck is this? Like, why are we going here? And but I will say, the second time I read it, I remember I texted Ryan this, but the second time I read it, I enjoyed it a lot more. And I think that first time slogging through it, and this is something you hear a lot about on Reddit, at least that's what I heard. But like, I needed that first time to kind of just like introduce myself to the world and really struggle with the book for me to like enjoy it the second time. Like the first time I read it, I was just trying to understand what was happening, right? Whereas the second time I read it, I suddenly like understood the subtext of conversations, right? Like the first time I read the Fade Rotha scene and like Count Fenring, I was like who is this guy? Like why are we in the scene at all? And then like the second time I read it, I was like, oh, there's some like big time political scheming going on right now. Like this is emperor shit, not just like Arrakis shit. So like, yeah, the second
Big
time was
world.
much more enjoyable. I still have some big time criticisms of the book. And this is kind of what I want to get into when like talking about the movie specifically. In my opinion, Denis stripped everything that was bad about the book, bad or borderline not like, I don't know how to say this, but just like the weird stuff that we know the public just wouldn't be okay with, right? Like with his sister, you know what I mean? Like, I thought the choice to keep Jessica pregnant was like brilliant, and like not bring his sister into the world and have her be the one that kills Baron Harkonnen with the Gom Jabbar. Like that, you know, in the book, I was just like, huh, okay, that's kind of weird. And then consolidating Count Fenring into one character of just doing Lady Fenring, I also thought was like really smart. There were other changes too. I just felt like every change he made from the book, I felt was just like, all right, boom. He stripped all the bullshit and just every change he made just paid off for me. How did you guys think about like specifically the changes he made from the book for the movie?
I think those are two really important ones that make sense in the medium that is like film storytelling, because they are super weird, and for it to be at such a hit. I mean, it's already a big risk to do this, and so I think what he did was what you're saying, spot on. Some differences I felt were like Channy and Paul. I don't remember her being, and it's been a while since I've read the book, so
in
you
the
might have
book,
to fill me in.
they're like very loving. They have a kid. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember that.
exactly.
Yeah, like 2 years pass in the book. From when he meets the Fremen to like when they, you know, when like the wars and the battles start and stuff like that. And they have Leto, like
Exactly. Yeah. So that was not in there. And then I also didn't remember her being so like, I don't know. I just remember it being such a like Paul's got to go with her. It just kind of is what it is. And I didn't remember getting a real good pulse on like her emotion and the drama behind it. Like they had a relationship. And that was very evident in the movie, because you have the big scene of her storming out when Paul takes the hand of the Emperor's daughter.
which
So
that
was
has
one.
big implications going into the third movie, because that's like a big departure from the book. But that's something I guess we'll just have to wait and see how he's gonna take care of that. But like to Mikey's point, they characterize Chani like a lot more in Dune Part 2 than they did in the book. In the book, she's really just like his concubine.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. The adaptation of there is conflict that arises from the Holy War. I think that doesn't change. The thematic through line of there being a dissent among the Fremen that you'll soon find out in the second book through Messiah. That's still there, but the choice to make it Chani who kind of leads that and separates from Paul makes a lot of sense. It makes it way more dramatic and interesting because in the book, like she's not even really her own person. She's just there to be supportive of Paul, which whatever. Frank Herbert, for as good of a world as he has built, is I think really bad at telling female characters, because Lady Jessica in the book also interesting, but towards the end of the first book and then obviously the second book, she just becomes a non-factor. I don't even think she's in the second book except for maybe mentioned once. She comes back in the third book, but her motivations and choices don't really matter all that much. She's not really that big of a player.
Point of view,
but in this movie, she is like sinister, man. I mean, like she is manipulating everything from day one, the moment that she takes
the Bene Gesserit in general, all the Bene Gesserit characters.
So
I was going to say, I think he told the Bene Gesserit, he used Jessica as a way to really explain and demonstrate the Bene Gesserit.
Yes. So obviously one big change, Chani separating from Paul and going her own way, which I think is incredible. It's incredible storytelling. It adds a really, really dramatic conflict that now we have to kind of, we're kind of left with knowing from what Paul says that he's seen the future. So he knows that she comes around, but how does that happen? What does that mean? Cause it's so different from the books. Jessica's character is obviously very different. She's way more of a villain role in this movie than she is in the book. In the book, a lot of what she does is out of self-preservation, protecting Aaliyah and protecting Paul. And in this, she is very much scheming and manipulating the Fremen into following Paul. And, Paul ultimately becomes that figure that he dreads throughout the movie. Another really big change, we talked about the 2-year time jump that they don't do. Aaliyah staying in the womb, which you guys were talking about how he tones down the weirdness, but in his classic style, he finds his own weirdness to add. I think a psionic fetus talking to you is pretty weird, and I think that's the kind of weird that is still very on point for what Dune is. So I thought that was great.
I think it's more digestible for audiences. You know what I mean?
For sure. So that's a big change. And then to your point about the Bene Gesserit, Ryan, one of the really big changes that has a lot of implications going forward. I think he kind of did it as a way to really showcase how powerful the Bene Gesserit are and how much they play the politics game. Is what they added in the movie was that it was the Bene Gesserit that sort of set the emperor on the Atreides, right? It was the Reverend Mother that suggested that he kill Paul's father. So that was a really, really big change. A minor change being that Princess Arulan in the books is kind of again, similar to Chani, doesn't really have a lot of agency, is kind of a mediocre Bene Gesserit at best, I think is how she's described. She's just kind of more of a figurehead more than anything. Paul makes it very clear that he's not in love with her, and it's a political marriage, nothing else.
Yeah.
But in the movie, she has a lot of really great scenes. She's not in the movie a whole lot, but the scenes that she's in, she's very cunning. She quickly understands what's going on. She figures out that Paul is alive, and she, so I love that. I love that she kind of is a little bit more formidable in the movies than she is in the book.
Yeah, 100%. And another thing that I want to talk about, in the movie, they make it less ambiguous on Paul's mythic rise, or not, maybe not mythic, but the mysticism around him being the Kwisatz Haderach, or him being Lisan Al Gaib. Like it's pretty clear that he and Jessica are just like manipulating behind the scenes, right? Whereas in the book, I feel like it's more the other way around, at least in the first book. In the first book, you really don't see any sort of like manipulating behind the scenes. You don't really, it's not really like left up to interpretation that he's the Lisan Al Gaib or the Kwisatz Haderach. Like in the book, it's like, oh yeah, this dude's the chosen one for sure.
I mean, yes and no. I think you're right in that it's not as heavily prevalent that it's just manipulation. It's clearly there in the book, and I think that's sort of the theme that Herbert is trying to play on. There is still a mysticism to it. It is very mythological and stuff. And I think that's mainly just because you're getting so much internal monologue and you're kind of actually hearing what's going on in Paul's head and Lady Jessica's head. Like you're getting so much omnipresent narration. So you're kind of hearing a lot of this, how it works. It's very dense, but it is, I think you're getting the benefit of that. I think with the movie, it's very much like the fantasy part of it, of the awakening of the memories, is not as important as, like you said, like how they're manipulating and pulling the strings and getting the Fremen on board. Which is really interesting because I think the biggest challenge and the thing that you have to nail if you're adapting something we've talked about, it's about the medium and it's about like the time in which the thing that you're adapting is being told now, right? It was a perfect story for, today's age. I think what themes that Frank Herbert was trying to tell is exactly what Denny did with this movie. Frank Herbert always wanted you to know that it's the danger of a charismatic religious figure. When you start down the even if it's a good person, when you start the process of like a savior, of looking to a savior, looking to someone to be your hero, to become your leader, problems arise, right? You cannot look to someone to become your Messiah. And I think Denny knows that, and he knew that was the whole point of going down the Kwisatz Haderach, and obviously the prescience and seeing the future. It's a very cool mythical thing, but the important thing was that he wanted you to think, were the Fremen actually better off by following Paul? Because look what happens, right? Sort of a off-topic thing, but related. A lot of people will say like, well, it's weird that like the Fremen are clearly based on like Arabic cultures and people from the Middle East and Northern Africa. And then, Paul obviously being sort of a white guy, it's like, oh, so is this just a white savior story? It's like, no, it's actually the opposite. I think that's what's the point, is Frank is trying to tell you. Yeah. I mean, he kind of is, this outsider colonizer who's come in and sort of, brought the people together for a revolution. But is that actually a good thing? Is what he gave them better than what would have happened if, I think someone mentions it in the movie. I think it's mentioned in the book, but it might be mentioned in the movie too, where they're like, the Lisan Al Gaib needs to come from our own people, right? There's a group of Fremen who say, well, the Lisan Al Gaib will come from us, right? And so there's sort of that question of, if that had happened, would that not have been better than Paul coming in, who is very clearly a flawed character? He's motivated by some altruistic things, like, he does care about the Fremen. He is, he's in love with Chani, so he's driven by love, by passion, to protect his mother, to protect his house, protect his family. But he's also very, very driven by revenge and sort of the power game. And that's the point, right? I think all the other stuff is great. It's a little bit of field dressing, right? It's all sort of to pull you into this world that's not Earth. But the main thing that you want to make sure you understand is that it's a figure who is tragically flawed, maybe good at the start. He had good intentions going into it. He wanted to protect his people. He wanted to become a Fremen. But as soon as he accepted the power, and he fully became prescient and became that religious figure, it set him down the course that he could not stop, and he basically leads to the deaths of millions or billions of people. So I think Denis knew that explicitly and did everything possible to create a perfect adaptation of that for a modern audience. I don't think anybody left that theater confused as to what happened, right? Maybe people didn't quite understand, the mythological stuff. Like, okay, why does drinking the water of life make you die or give you visions? Like, you maybe don't understand quite all that stuff, but you get that as soon as Paul took that step, he changed. He became a different character, and you knew that bad things were coming. And I think that is the quintessential thing that you have to have in an adaptation, and he did it perfectly.
Yeah, and so I watched it with my buddy Gio, and he had never read the book, and he walked away from the movie and was basically like, "So is Paul the bad guy? Like, is he gonna end up the bad guy?" And I'm like, "You're spot on. Like, that's what the main theme of these movies / books are, right? Like, it's a chosen one story, but it's like a cautionary story of chosen ones." And the reason I brought that up is because I'm glad that Denis knew and was very intentional that is like the main through line of the books. Because what's funny is if you like just read the first book and it, if you talk to people who have only read the first book, it might be like the first book has been misinterpreted to just think it's like a classic chosen one story, right? Like if you don't read on and like really understand what else Frank Herbert was trying to say with Paul, then you'll just think it's like the classic hero's journey, classic white savior, classic chosen one story. But Denis was very intentional in that, like, no, this is a trilogy that I'm trying to say. And this third movie / second book is really what like the whole arc of Paul is. And I love that, because for me, it was a subtle difference in the movie as compared to just reading the book. Because remember, I've only read the first book. And in the first book, it does kind of feel that way. It does kind of feel like it's just a chosen one story. Paul is the badass. He is the Kwisatz Haderach and stuff like that. Whereas in the movie, it is a little less ambiguous in that sense. It is more explicitly shown that like Paul might be power hungry. He might not actually be this mythological figure, which I liked. Like, yeah.
Well, what's really funny? I was just going to mention this. It's really funny because when Herbert wrote the first book, he was confused when the reception of that first book was that everybody thought Paul was the hero. I think he has an interview.
Hilarious.
I may have saw it on YouTube. I don't remember. It was a long time ago, but it was something up to the effect of like, he was like confused why everyone was like relating to Paul, right? Like, I do think there are aspects of Paul that we can all relate to, and we can all see, our better nature. And also when we've fallen short or we've been, motivated by power or whatever,
we do all love a revenge story. Like, I definitely
relate
to that. Like that, his revenge story is awesome, but
he was just like, he's like, I very clearly, I thought made it very clear that Paul is not to be viewed as the savior. He's he's the bringer of the end, essentially, right? It's a cautionary tale. That's why he told the story. He wanted to caution people, like I've already mentioned several times. So his second book, Messiah, I think he very clearly wrote it with the intention of, okay, we're going to make absolutely sure that people know who Paul is and why this was a bad thing, right? And I think hopefully when we have the third movie, that will be very, very clear, and it will be a really,
that's
really
funny
good
though,
story.
because it's almost like Frank Herbert did it too well, and it's like it's ironic because like he set out to do a cautionary tale on chosen ones, and it turns out everybody, including the readers, loves Paul. Like, and that wasn't the intention, but that just goes to show like that's human nature, right? Like we like to.
In a weird way, he's proving the point of exactly what happens when you follow a charismatic leader. Paul is just he's so magnetic. It's no wonder why, he created the religious fervor that he did, and it caused everybody to freak out. Lisan al-Gaib, like he has that, and I think Timothée Chalamet like obviously embodies that perfectly. I don't want to go completely off topic, but I just also thought I should mention that he nailed the role of Paul.
This is
like, dude,
I want to talk
incredible.
about this. I want to talk about
Yeah.
performance now. That's a perfect segue. Okay, Mikey. The first time I watched the movie, I disagreed with you. I thought Timothée Chalamet's performance was the weakest. And again, I want to say up front, this was my first viewing of it. I thought he was overshadowed by Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha. Dude, Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha was fucking incredible. And then obviously Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Harkonnen. He was amazing in the first one. He's amazing in the second one. And then Javier Bardem as what's his name?
Stilgar.
Yeah, Stilgar. I thought he was amazing. And then obviously,
that's what I was going to say. That's, to me, that's the standout role of the movie. He absolutely nailed it. Florence Pugh as
Princess
Irulan was
Irulan,
incredible.
yes.
Anya Taylor-Joy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, even in her little role like that. I just felt like everybody had amazing performances, and then Chalamet just kind of like got overshadowed in my eyes. But the second time I watched it, I noticed there was a lot more like subtlety to his performance. Like I noticed a lot more of like the inner conflict within him that I didn't really catch the first time. Like a lot of what Paul is this dude who's just like the whole time he's teetering on the edge of like, should I just, settle down and become a Fremen? Like, should I just lead this life with Chani? She's pretty chill. I kind of like her. But then my mom is just telling me to be the chosen one. And like, fuck, I don't know if I want to do this. And then
plus this guy killed my dad.
Yeah. And then he's like, I do want to get revenge. But then he drinks the water of life and he flips the switch. And from that moment on, that's really when, like, at least the second time I watched it, I was like, okay, his performance was really good. Like the way he was able to flip from that like conflicted kind of young, still kind of growing up, just kid who just like lost his dad to, okay, I'm like now power hungry. I'm the fucking chosen one. I'm starting to believe my myth kind of thing. I thought he handled that really well.
When he's yelling and basically tells that guy that kind of stands up against him, the Fremen, about what he dreams about.
Yeah.
You remember that scene? Yeah. Oh my God, I got goosebumps.
Yes.
That was my big goosebump scene, man.
When he was yelling in the Fremen language, that stuff, I felt like that was his like best lines and best performances of the movie. I've said this before on the podcast. I don't know what it is, but whenever an American actor, he's not all American, but he has like an American accent. Whenever like an American accent protagonist is surrounded by people with like English accents and like cool, like Javier Bardem has like the Fremen accent and stuff like that. Like it just feels, for me, it just feels so out of place. Like I wish everyone had like a foreign accent. You know what I mean? To hear just like a standard American accent, it just feels like this dude is like from our world and he's like the only one from our world in that world. I don't know. That's just a me thing. I've always felt like that way for like a lot of movies.
Well, I think what's his name? The Jamis. I think Jamis in the first movie, and then when he has like the little like visions of him in the second movie, I think he has a bit of an accent. Might be different than Stilgar's, but I think I could be wrong, but I think the Southern Fremen sort of also had the accent that Stilgar had, and the Northern Fremen didn't. So that obviously could have been a little bit more consistent, and there could have been something. But I do like that. I think the point of that was just to show the differences in culture and the subtleties of the Northern versus the Southern, which I thought, again, I mentioned it earlier in the episode, but that to me was such an incredibly good change, along with stuff with Chani. But like just in general, the fact that the Fremen were not just one static, just all the same. What do you call that? Homogenous group. Yeah. Not just one group of people that all think the exact same thing. I think you'll even see that later on in Frank Herbert's books. When you get into the really weird stuff in book 3 and 4, like he has like this way he wants to like show you like, oh, book 4 takes place, 3,000 years after the first 3 books. But yet people act almost exactly the same, right? It's like he doesn't really have a good grasp. I shouldn't say he doesn't have a good grasp. He does a lot of really cool stuff, how things change, but in terms of like how groups will grow and like their ideas will change and language changes, I don't think he does a really good job nailing that with the passage of time. But I thought that this movie really kind of fixes that problem and gives them all a unique way of looking at the world that is not just, oh, the Fremen think this way.
So all
Fremen think this way, right? I think, I thought that was really well done.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Ernie. I had a similar thing happen to me in a different sci-fi series, The Expanse, when, if you don't know much about that one, it's basically in our universe, galaxy, but like in the future, and they're on space stations and all this stuff. And these people took like patois Caribbean accents, and they're living on space stations. And for me, that took me out of it. So like that's a thing that can really, I get what you're saying about Timothée Chalamet just having a standard English accent. Is like, is that how they sound on Caladan?
Yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention, the final piece to that is that I just don't find American accents like at all charismatic or intimidating. And so when he's speaking in English and like, I'm just like, I don't find this convincing. But when he was speaking in the Fremen language, I was like, oh shit.
Yeah,
like
that was good.
This is badass.
Ernie, I agree with you, except you're missing the incredible performance of Josh Brolin.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he doesn't have an accent, but dude, I'd follow him anywhere. Dude, if he told me to do something, I'd do it.
You're totally right. But Brolin has like this like unique like voice, like I don't know, grungy kind of voice to him, to where I don't know. Like you're right. I would follow that man fucking anywhere. But yeah, I don't know. He's another category because he like has like a unique kind of voice to him.
That's true. If Timothée sounded, if he had some sort of unique characteristic about his voice, I think that would have even set it over the top. Because Johnny Depp has like a unique
sound. Yeah,
like
just like the cadence of his voice and stuff like that. And one thing that I fucking loved that Austin Butler did with Fade Rotha is he did like Stellan Skarsgård's Swedish kind of accent with like he made the Harkonnens kind of all sound like Stellan Skarsgård, which I thought was just brilliant.
I was sure I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah.
I can't take Christopher Walken serious. And so that was the one role that I did not like. Because all I can think about is him talking about the watch.
Soldering
this is your
iron.
father's watch. He was in a prison cavity, put it up his ass, and now I'm passing it to you.
Killed a lot of gooks to get here.
Yeah.
Paul, I had a lot of spice.
Exactly.
You know where I kept that spice for a long time?
There was only one scene where it really was just like, oh god, that's Christopher Walken. I feel like he had a lot of lines that were like short. Yeah. Like he didn't go on a lot of monologues like he normally does, which is good. So his didn't bother me as much. But okay, since we're on the topic of performances and things like that, is there any other performances you guys wanted to highlight or any particular scenes you would like to highlight? One thing we haven't talked about for me, having read the book, I knew this was going to happen in the movie and I knew what the outcome was. But one scene that like absolutely gripped me in the theater was the sandworm ride, Paul's first ride on the sandworm.
Dude,
incredible, dude. Yeah. Was there any other scene that you guys wanted to highlight or talk about?
I think just getting more, this movie felt some more boots on the ground. So there were a lot of moments of just like using the tech or like the voice was used and just like getting back in that world and getting more of the world, I think is basically a big thing that I came away from it. Just like I could live in that world, man.
Dude,
Like-
first like thing, like the first scene that really hit me hard was the worm scene. I thought that one was like, that's where I was like, oh shit, it's happening, boys. We're here. Lisa Nel Gaib for sure. But then that incredible fight scene between Fade Rapha and Paul.
Yes.
May thy knife chip and shatter. That was really funny at that moment because it was like Paul very much was showing him respect. He's like, may thy knife chip and shatter. And Fade Rapha like obviously doesn't know what that means. So he's just like, and you too, I guess. And may thy knife chip and shatter. Fucking weirdo. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was an incredible fight scene. I was on the edge of, I mean, I knew he was going to win, but like just watching that was stellar.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that real quick, Mikey. Yeah. That's another change we haven't talked about, and a very subtle change that I thought was fucking nailed in the movie. So in the book, Fade Rapha, when he fights in the Gladiator Gladiator arena on his birthday, he has the backup poison, right? Like he has kind of his little out, like, oh, just in case I'm in trouble, you know, I can act it. It's a word string. Like if he says a certain word or something like that, the Atreides fighter that he's fighting will just all of a sudden go dumb and he'll kill him. Whereas in the movie, they didn't do that at all. He just fought a straight up dude who was not drugged like the other ones were. And so that subtle change was enough to make him like super intimidating and a super badass, rather than just like another Harkonnen who like, you know, uses poison or uses a crutch to get out of like sticky situations. Like by the time he fought Paul, you knew like, oh shit, this dude could actually kill Paul, which like, yeah, like that little subtle change for me is just like, oh, perfect, Denis. Fucking perfect.
That was perfect.
That was a great change. I think in the book, I mean, yeah, you're right. The whole point is to show the slipperiness and the evil cunning of the Harkonnens. I mean, and that's still there, but just that little change just puts so much extra tension. And he did that on purpose because he knows that by doing that, when you have that final scene with Paul, like you're gonna remember that. You're gonna remember just how like merciless this dude is, and how like he's not gonna be fazed by Paul's fighting skill at all. Paul's gonna be on his back foot. Like just incredible. Like what a great subtle change. And like, you know, in the book, the whole point of Fade Rapha is that he could easily have been Paul. Yeah. Right. Like he's bred to be the exact same sort of, well, I guess a little bit different. I think the original intent from the Bene Gesserit's plan was that Fade was going to marry Paul because Paul was supposed to be a female, and that their child was supposed to be the Kwisatz Haderach.
Right. So by that time, the bloodline would be perfect. Yeah. But Jessica jumped the gun.
Right. But I think in the book, like there's a, you know, when that fight scene happens in the book, I think Paul, you know, references how incredibly skilled Fade Rapha is, and that, you know, he very easily could have, you know, had things gone differently, he could have been, you know, the Kwisatz Haderach too. Right. I think he also mentions that Count Fenring could have been the Kwisatz Haderach. You know, just there are other candidates for this power, and Paul ultimately is the one to grab that power. But I think regardless of all that stuff, just the sheer force that Fade Rapha presents in that final scene is just like gripping. I love that.
And he legit almost takes him out. Like he gets that first stab on him. Mm-hmm. So
and then like in the book, you know, it's more clear that Paul does that thing on purpose where he like pretends to be staggered and then stabs him. And I don't know if in the movie it's as clear that that's what's happening, but I choose to believe in my headcanon that he does the exact same thing. Like, because, you know, Timothée Chalamet like starts breathing really heavy and he's like, and then, you know, catches him. I think that was still a purposeful thing, but it's great. And then when he tells the Reverend Mother to be quiet.
Yes.
Dude.
Wow. Yeah. Oh man. The voice
Abomination.
Is yeah.
Which is really funny because that's usually what is said about Aaliyah. And so that gets attributed to Paul, which, you know, still great.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah, the preborn thing that Aaliyah
Yeah,
becomes. That's
Aaliyah
what the
was
abomination
the
is.
abomination. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's right. Wow.
The movie, yeah, definitely did a great job of exposing the religious, I don't know, like pressures and kind of how important that part actually is and how much of a game that the Bene Gesserit makes it. And I think that Denny did a really good job of detailing that because I don't think I knew reading the books, obviously they're there and they're a hard line part of the whole story and stuff. But I definitely felt it there. Another scene that I really liked was when Paul and Gurney Halleck reunite
Mm,
after that little bit of action there. So awesome.
yeah.
Very wholesome too.
Yeah. I mean, I would hug Josh Brolin like that if I ran into him.
When when he was playing, when he's in that spice thing, the spice digger or whatever, and he's playing on his
The Balisette, yes.
the balisette. His character
Love
is so
that.
lovable, man.
Yeah.
How did you guys feel about? Sorry, I'm going to kind of take us back to the ending. But how did you guys feel about the ending where the houses don't bow down to Paul? They don't accept his offer to become emperor. I don't know what implications that's going to have on the third movie, but to me, I thought that was a really interesting subtle change because I'm pretty sure in the book it's just like, yeah, they're like they
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
they're not chancing it. They don't call his bluff and they just accept that he's
Yeah.
the emperor, and then he's still, the war still happens. But in this, it's very much like a willing thing where Paul's like, all right, fuck you then. Game on.
Yeah. So this, I'm glad you brought that up because this was actually something I wanted to point to you guys because I haven't read Dune Messiah yet. I plan to before the third movie, but like, because yes, you're right, Mikey. In the book, really the ones who are leading the negotiation are the Spacing Guild, which isn't as big of a thing in the movie. And that is one
They're
change that
barely
I don't.
referenced. Yeah.
Yeah, that is one change that like I don't know if I disagree with. I don't know if it was like a lot of the changes we've discussed. I'm like wholeheartedly agree. I thought it was the right move, but to remove the Spacing Guild, especially for the ending, I'm sitting here wondering what implications does that have going into the third movie. And for me, it just kind of felt like, you know what, Denis just wanted to go straight into the Holy War that I'm assuming Dune Messiah is about, and he kind of wanted to like leave on that cliffhanger. You know what I mean? Like very much like Two Towers. You know what I mean? Like we won the battle, but there's a big fucking war coming. So I think like that was one aspect of it. But I wanted to ask you guys, like you guys have read the next books, like do you have any concerns or do you have any worries going into the third movie? Like what was your guys' interpretation of the ending and like where it's going?
I think in the end, it's gonna get there. Paul is gonna slaughter billions of people, and he is gonna be the emperor.
Why did you
Um,
sign? Why did you sound so excited for that, Brian? That was weird. You had a smile on your face when you said that. Like you were just,
Paul is definitely going to
he's
kill
gonna
those
kill
he's
so
billions.
many
totally
people.
gonna do
And
it,
Denis
guys.
just getting straight to it, man.
Yeah, just wait for it. It's gonna happen. I mean, I seriously think there will be some divergence in how he gets there, maybe, but it's inevitable. That's gonna happen.
Um, I mean, I have no concerns. I mean, at this point, what do I have to doubt? He's going to
True.
land the plane. I have no doubts he's going to land the plane. He may do it in his own way. It may be something completely out of left field that I was not expecting, but I'm going to enjoy every gosh darn minute of it.
Is the expectation that the third movie how far into Dune Messiah does it go? Is there an expectation there?
I
From
think
what
it's
I've
supposed to be the
read,
whole book.
How the
yeah.
hell?
So I
It
mean,
was pretty
I don't
short.
know. I haven't read
I
Dune
know, but I
Messiah.
feel like there's so much
Sure. I
to
mean,
explain.
he might do the time jump that he didn't do in this movie. He may choose to do a really big time jump and sort of show you I mean, I don't know. I could definitely see a world where he chooses to really go in on the war, because you don't really get that in Messiah. You are in Messiah,
Yeah.
you're just looking at the aftermath, right? And you're just seeing
Mm.
how that affected the universe. And
Yeah.
he may choose to really get gritty with it and really get into like the war itself and how it was fought and how planets were conquered. That would be really, really cool. Or, you know, he might just do the time jump. I think whichever way he chooses to go, I knowing that he has always understood the assignment, I know he's going to nail it no matter what. But I am curious to see if he chooses to put more of an emphasis on the war, because I mean the war has a little bit more of an emphasis at the end of this movie, right? Like you're kind of seeing that start, and
The whole point.
like
Yeah.
you know Jessica is pretty much like on board for it. I think in the book she like is very much like, holy crap, what did we do? Oh no, we've made a huge mistake.
Gone too
And in the
far.
movie she's just like, game on,
Send it.
send
Yeah,
it.
she is like send it. Yeah.
Um,
Man, I'm glad you guys have brought up some of these differences because I know, like you said, Denny is going to land the plane and it's going to be great. And I think at the end of the day, the same thing's going to happen. But those are some big differences with like Leto not being born, with Aaliyah not being born. Um, how?
yeah,
Yeah, I
actually,
mean,
I want to talk about that real quick because you guys have both mentioned um, Paul and Chani's son. So that's actually, and I haven't really commented on that yet. That's a really, really good point. You know, the part of what Herbert does with that son that basically dies
Yeah.
in the book,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Leto
what
is born
happens is
and dies.
he's born and then dies during the raid on
Yeah. Off
Arrakis.
scene too.
Yeah,
Like
just completely off screen. But that
yeah.
was, I think, that character was always the vehicle for showing why Paul was in the wrong and how the consequences of what you've wrought, right? And showing that Paul, even at the death of his son, is not going to stop what he's doing because he can't, right? I mean, Paul ultimately becomes a tragic figure in that he is, he's locked into his fate, and he knows no matter what he does, the war is going to happen regardless. And then now in that character kind of shows this is the personal stakes. Obviously the ultimate stakes is that 90% of the freaking population of the galaxy dies.
Right.
But on a personal level for Paul, he loses his son. And I think a lot of that gets explored through Paul's psyche in the second book, right? Of like, I need to make this right. Look what I've caused. And I think that character always just sort of served to be like, these are the stakes in which Paul is playing with. And so with the changes that they've made and not having Paul's son already present, that could serve as like the thing that when inevitably Paul and Chani come back together in that next movie, it could be when Chani is pregnant. I had thought that because I thought is kind of my theory. There's that scene in this movie where they sleep together, and I don't remember. That might be the scene where she says like, "As long as you stay, I'll always be with you," right? But that could have very well been a subtle setting up of Chani might be pregnant. We don't know.
Yeah.
She could be pregnant when she
that.
leaves on the worm, and then that could sort of be what either reconciles them or at least brings them back together for something. It could be the birth of Paul's son. So
he's got to pay that child support.
Got to pay that
Arrakis spice child support.
That's water.
Yeah, he's got to pay that water bill.
That's the water bill.
Child support for water.
Yeah. What happens when Chani's water breaks? Do they have to like make her pay for that? Like, they got so upset when Lady Jessica puked.
Yeah.
They were like, don't do that.
That's at least a decaliter of water, dude.
I'm sure they have some device. They have some device that would.
No, that's true.
To capture it. Yeah. It's a Prager still suit.
Yeah.
Don't say that. I hate that.
All right. So okay. That's all I had for this episode. Was there any closing thoughts for you guys? Anything else you wanted to bring up?
Can't wait for the third one.
Yeah.
Cannot wait.
Yeah. So there's going to be a gap. That kind of, I guess that answers our question. But Denis has said he wants to wait 5 or 6 years before the third movie comes out. So we've got a little bit. Yeah. But I think he's doing that on purpose to like age up Chalamet, Zendaya. And maybe there really will be like a big time gap in the third movie. Yeah. So maybe.
Awesome.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm looking forward to reading Dune Messiah and then having coming back and doing episode 3 for Bros Book Club when the third movie comes out.
I think now that you've given yourself the chance to really read through the first book and you've given it a fair shake and now you understand it a little better. Yeah. I think with that attitude in mind, you will like the second book. I think if you hadn't gone through this experience and you hadn't read the book again, and then you tried to jump into Messiah, you'd be like, what the hell did they do? This is crap, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Paul's just a broken shell of a man. This is awful. I think a lot of people have that opinion. Like, they're like, what is this? Paul's not the same. But again, they just fundamentally just didn't have that. They had the expectation that Paul was the hero and I'm supposed to see him be the hero in the second one. Yeah. And then they're like, well, what's this? So I think going into it, you're going to like the second one a lot.
And you kind of know what to expect when it comes to weirdness and the weirdness.
Right,
this is the beginning of the weirdness just completely going off the graph.
Even more. Okay, great.
Yeah.
I do want to say one thing before we leave here. So I posit a challenge for both of you. When part 2 comes out streaming, I want you to watch part 1 and then part 2 back to back. That's going to be a marathon in and of itself. That's going to be
that's 5 hours.
5, 6. Well, wait, how long was the first one?
2.5 hours, I believe.
I thought it was like 3 hours. No, the second one's 3 hours, and the second one's not quite 6 hours. Okay, but anyway, I want you guys to do that because I think that would be a really interesting episode because I think there was a lot of subtle stuff with Paul's visions and the things he was seeing in the first movie that a lot of people either just really don't think about because we're so hung up on the second one and the stuff in that. I think there was hints and things that Denny was alluding to that will happen maybe even in the third movie in movie 1. And here's my theory. So I'll posit this. So without spoiling too much for you, Ernie, there is going to be an assassination plot in the second book. That's going to be a big theme. Just throwing it out there. He's, the emperor. So if you were expecting him to have a nice time, sorry to spoil that for you. Anyway, so knowing that that's going to happen, go back and watch the first movie. There is a scene where Paul gets stabbed. And I want you to think about that and think about who stabs him. Because that scene is sort of, it's logically, it's like explained off as, when you have those visions, like they're incomplete. Maybe it's metaphorical. Maybe it's just someone giving you the blade. And, because he's given the gift of the blade from, so he can fight Jamis.
Right.
But I think there could be a double meaning there because he legitimately gets stabbed.
Holy shit.
I think there might be something there.
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. And he set it up with this cliffhanger. Oh my God.
And then also, as another thing, there is something that happens to Paul in the second book that's going to be really interesting for you to see. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but something happens to Paul. And in the second movie, there's a scene, the scene where he sees Chani basically get like burned.
Oh yeah.
And, like her skin melts off and shit. I wonder if that is also a reference to something that might happen in the third movie. And maybe he's kind of getting his wires crossed and maybe he's seeing something that happens, but to a different person. Or maybe he's not seeing it exactly as it'll happen. Just
we're going to have to
go into it and think about that.
Okay, nice. Calling your shot. I like it. I actually do have one thing I want to close with. I want to ask each of you, now that we have full book 1, we're just going to compare book 1 to both movies. Which one is better? Did they make a movie that was better than the books, or is the book still better than the movies? Ryan, you go first.
Fuck.
Okay, I'll go first. Undoubtedly, for me, you guys know I didn't have the best reading experience of Dune. For me, the movies blew the book out of the water, especially the second one. The first one for me was a really good adaptation. I thought it was like, pretty on par with the book. But part 2 for me, oh my God, it just elevated it beyond the book in my eyes. Mikey?
I hate to say it, but I'm with you. Movie's better.
Wow.
I love the book. I do. I like the book a lot. It was one of the
Okay.
best sci-fi books I've read. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the series all the way up to the 4th book. I've always been clear about that. I think Dune is better than Star Wars, even though I love Star Wars. Like, I'm always going to be a huge fan of the book, but 100% the movie is better.
Wow. I'm actually really surprised
strips out
by that.
all the stuff that is important about the book and refines it and turns it into something that is better than the source material. 100%.
Okay. Ryan?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You guys are right. But it's so hard to say that because, like, we don't have the movie without the book.
No,
And,
you're right. But what I'm saying is this one of those rare movies like The Shining, Shawshank Redemption? Just like, one of those rare movies where it's like, for sure the movie is better than, or at least was just an adaptation that was like equal to the book, if not better.
Let's put it this way. If someone's like, hey, I'm really wanting to get into like a sci-fi story and I want to watch something kind of like Star Wars, like, let's be honest. Are you going to tell the average person to go read the Dune books?
Right.
Or would you tell them to watch the movies? Because I would probably tell them,
watch
the movies first. And if you really like the movies, then go read the books.
That's a good point.
It's a good point. It's a great way to put it. And the proof is in the pudding. Movies. Denny told the story better than Frank.
Ooh, spicy. Ooh, I didn't know this podcast had so much spice in it.
NSFW, not safe for work.
Listen, Al-Gaib!
Listen, Al-Gaib!
Thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and tune in next time for the next Dune episode in 5 to 6 years.